title of my thing is The Healing at the Pool on the Sabbath. And it's John 5, verses 1 through 9. So it goes something like, After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there is in Jerusalem, by the sheep gate, a pool, in Aramaic called Bethesda, which has 5 roofed colonnades. So those are like entryways that swoop like this, and you have a roof over you. Does that kind of make sense? In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there for a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now that day was a Sabbath. Now, if you were reading along and you probably weren't, that's totally cool. One little piece of exegesis here that's very obvious. This is supposed to be verses 1 through 9, but if you count the verses in here, verse 4 is probably missing from a lot of your interpretations. That's because verse 4 was added later on and then taken out by a lot of the other versions of the Bible. And it was added to make sense of verse 7, where it says, "The sick man answered, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred." Because what does stirring of the water mean? So, verse 4, it makes sense of this stirring of the water, reads, "For an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was healed of whatever disease he had." So we have some religious stipulations going on that are being laid out for what they believed at the time. So I want to start by getting into this by first looking at the question that Jesus asked him. Do you want to be healed? He doesn't ask him, how is it that you've been here for 38 years and haven't made it into the pool yet? But the man answers as if he was asked, how is it? He justifies. So it's clear that he's got this certain idea of himself. And it's clear that he was probably told by the religious leaders at the time, hey, I see you have a lame arm. So we call that an invalid. You're an invalid. And what this means for you because of this is you're going to need to hang out at this portico here, and you're going to have to wait for this angel to come in. And when he stirs up the water, you're going to need to get in there first. And until you get in there first, you can't leave. This is just what happens for you. And it's clear that society probably said the same thing. This is what this means for you. And then you can imagine that he probably looked around at these healing pools and saw people that looked just like him. And he saw that the meaning that they had given to their lameness. And he said to himself, yeah, this is what this means for me. So 38 years of his life has gone by. And he's waiting at the pool. And it's interesting that Jesus goes to this man who's been there for 38 years. It seems like that's alarming to Jesus. There's all these other people that are blind and lame, but because this one's been here for 38 years, this is outstanding to him. And I would imagine that after hearing 38 years, Jesus was probably like, this guy is swallowed alive. He is in so deep into this invalid thing that he's been told. He doesn't see how someone else's story has probably eaten up 38 years of his life. And he doesn't see that he's got this freedom that enables him to decide what circumstances can mean for him. And he doesn't see that this freedom, this is the image of God that's been given to him. So this isn't a sweet story of sweet Jesus finding a a sweet man, and he's been rejected by society again. Society is always so cruel, and Jesus always has to go and save the day. This is a story of a man that rejected himself by rejecting his freedom, and in so rejecting the image of God in him. And it's interesting, this question that Jesus asked, the do you want to be healed? He's asking him, what do you want to do? It's like that question reorients him back to just himself. When I asked him, what do you want? He's putting a blinder on what the others around him appear to be doing, how they've chosen to accept what something means or doesn't mean for them that look like him. He's putting up a wall to the religious and what they say he needs to be doing with himself in his life. He's putting up blinders for what society is chattering about what this means for him. And he's reorienting him back to himself. What do you want to do? Because that's what matters. And he says, pick up your mat and go. You don't have to spend another hour doing something that someone else has told you that you need to be doing. You don't have to spend another minute listening to somebody else's story about your life. It's not actually yours. You can stand in the image of God. And therein is this man's cure. To know your freedom, to decide for yourself what you want to do, and to stand in the image of God. So I'm supposed to tie this into Easter. So I will say that you have to find your own meaning the way you have to find your own Easter eggs. And that is all.
May God be gracious to us and bless us, and make his face to shine upon us, that your way may be known upon the earth, your saving power among all nations. Let all the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you judge the peoples with equity and guide the nations upon the earth. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. The earth has yielded its increase. God, our God, has blessed us. May God continue to bless us. Let all the ends of the earth revere him. Psalm 67 is a psalm of blessing, a psalm asking for God's blessing, a psalm claiming promises from God. In the book of Psalms, which we know is a songbook, Psalm 67 is definitely a praise and worship psalm, meant to be consumed publicly. In verses 3 and 5, we have the refrain. You can almost see the worship leader standing, leading the people through this chorus. And then they get to those two refrains, and all of the people say, "Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you." It's a beautiful psalm that shows us that we don't need to be afraid to ask for God's blessing. The beginning of the psalm comes from Numbers 6. In Numbers 6, Moses gives Aaron the benediction that he's to use to bless the Israelite nation. Moses tells him to say, "The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." That was the benediction given to the Israelite people. In the beginning of this psalm, they claim that promise. Lord, bless us. Make your face shine upon us. They're boldly and proudly asking for God's blessing. Which begs the question, is asking for God's blessing a selfish act? Is asking God to give you something, to bless you, is that a selfish act? Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? All my friends drive Porsches, I must make amends. Worked hard all my lifetime, no help from my friends. Oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz? Oh Lord, won't you buy me a night on the town? I'm counting on you, Lord, don't let me down. Prove that you love me and buy the next round. Oh Lord, won't you buy me a night on the town? Love Janis Joplin. It's silly, but how many times have we said prayers like that? Lord, I'm a good guy. Prove that you love me and let me win the $308 million Powerball. Asking for God's blessing in that way can be selfish. And sometimes we ask for God's blessing in selfish ways. And it starts with something simple like, God, can you please help me find my keys so I'm not late for work? I promise if you help me find my keys, I'll do better. And then we start bargaining. But in this psalm, it shows us why we should be asking for God's blessings. Oh, lost my paper. It says that your way may be known upon the earth, your saving power among all nations. Let the nations be glad and sing for joy, for you judge the peoples with equity and guide the nations upon the earth. We should be asking for God's blessing to share it with all of the peoples on the earth. To know that when God blesses us, it's a reflection of Him that we can share with the whole world. And notice the way it says it. All the peoples of the earth. You know, sometimes the Israelites had issues with other peoples. The Samaritans. You touch one, you're unclean. But this psalm says we want to see your blessing among all the peoples. Not just those that look like us, not just those that believe like us, not just our friends who are gathered here with us, but all of the peoples of the earth. So the people are singing, praying for God's blessings, not for themselves, but that God's greatness might be known. And that brings us to the end of the psalm, which is my favorite part. If you're anything like me, which is to say human, I'm sure you've had down days. Days where you feel like where one problem ends, another one begins. Days where nothing's going right. Maybe you're in a season in your life where you feel like that. But the end of this psalm reminds us that God is blessing us. The end of the psalm says the entire earth has yielded its increase. God, our God, has blessed us. May God continue to bless us. Let all the ends of the earth revere Him. It's a good reminder that even when we get down, even in those times where we feel like nothing can go right, that if we look around us, we can see that God is blessing us. I mean, just look at this room. The people gathered here, being here together and worshiping is a blessing from God that we can use to spread His blessing and His joy throughout the world. as we do that together, the blessings that we already have become more apparent. I love the line in the responsive reading we've been doing. We are an Easter people. Our faith is an Easter faith. Our fears have died. Our fears have died. We're being blessed. We rise to dream, to love, to dance, to live. And that's what a life looks like when you claim God's blessing and share it with the rest of the world. Thank you.
Acts 16, 9 through 15. We set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis, and there to Philippi, which is the leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city for some days, and on the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate to the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer. And we sat down and spoke to a woman who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. And when she and the household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us. I absolutely love this text. When I first asked Rachel and Keith, which has been really fun to hear them speak, because we all three are pretty different in the way we approach things. Rachel sat, Keith stood, and I have my security pulpit. When I first asked them to speak, I was like, you take whichever ones you want and I'll have what's left over, right? Like, that's only fair. I mean, this is my job, you know. But luckily, they each picked a text I probably wouldn't have done anything with. So, one, it's great because we get the whole multitude of voices thing. And two, I got my favorite one anyway. But I love it because at first glance, it might not seem like much, right? It's just kind of your typical story from the book of Acts. Paul goes to some city, someone believes in this new message, boom, next thing, right? That's the whole point of Acts, the growth of the early church, its emergence, its struggles, its new movements. But you know, the full name of the book of Acts is the Acts of the Apostles, right? The actions of the apostles. It's Luke's account of the things that the apostles, the early leaders of this new movement, were up to. So we heard last week, right, for instance, the story about Peter, his life, and the point, you know, where he learned that the Gentiles are now included. Do not call people unclean, where he discovered, and then through him, the rest of the Jerusalem believers, the universality of this new message. And this story is no different, right? Watching the way that Paul moves in this story, the actions he takes, really displays for us, again, just how new this movement is, just how caught up in the spirit of resurrection it is. And I love this story too personally because Paul really kind of captures the kind of person that I want to be. Right? I get really excited when I put myself into the context of this story because when I do, a lot of meaning, a lot of application kind of naturally just spring out of it. So I want to do that quickly together with you, and we'll find something I think that can deepen the way we think about our world and think about our place within it. The first thing we find, right, is that Paul and his compatriots are in Philippi, and Luke makes a point to say it's a Roman colony. In other words, this isn't home court, right? Like, it's not Jewish central. Paul wasn't born and raised in Israel. He was born in Tarsus. He's no stranger to the Greco-Roman world. He was actually well-versed in it. But even Tarsus had a significant Jewish population, and as we mostly know about Paul, he was trained in that life being a Pharisee. And those other travelers with him at this time were very likely from Jerusalem, and so did not have a lot of contact with the Greco-Roman culture. As we look at the way Paul traveled around and proclaimed that there's this new way, this new king who's better than Caesar, we always see him kind of following the same model. Hit up a local synagogue, try to get the Jewish people on board with this like kind of new twist on being Jewish. And then we always see him going to the cultural centers as well, the marketplaces, the pagan temples, talking philosophy, with the pagan folk. Now, maybe there wasn't a synagogue in Philippi, or maybe they just couldn't find it, but whatever the case, Luke says that Paul goes outside the city to the river because they assumed there would be a place of prayer. So again, not comfort zone material for these Jewish teachers and leaders. Like if there's going to be Jewish folk in Philippi, apparently they're not even comfortable enough to meet within the city gates. But then things get even more crazy. They begin speaking to a group of women. Now, that doesn't sound too strange, does it? Except that it kind of is. Do you remember the story of the woman at the well where Jesus goes up to her and asks her a question? And the first thing she says to Jesus is, "Why are you, a Jewish male, talking to me, a woman?" The reason she was surprised is it was a very improper thing to do culturally, especially for those who were supposed to be seen as religious leaders. There were certain Pharisees, in fact, that would close their eyes if a woman passed, so that they would not even see the women. In religious settings today in the Middle East, we often see this still repeated, right? Certain sects of Judaism and Islam separate men and women for prayer, and then they come back after the time of prayer. So for Paul, a Pharisee, to approach a group of women and speak to them, right, about religious matters is somewhat strange. Even outside devout Jewish thinking of the time, right, within the broader Greco-Roman culture, women were not typically included in discussions of philosophy or politics. So on no level really does this kind of like make sense for the growth of a movement. You know, culturally, Paul's like going to the wrong kinds of people. And he's outside the gates. This is an unauthorized, right? This is unofficial. This is an unsanctioned kind of meeting. That's what we should hear in this story. That's what would have stood out to the people first hearing it. So as they're speaking to this group of women, one of the women overhears Paul. Lydia was her name. And Luke says she was a God worshiper. This is a technical term for a non-Jewish person who's sympathetic to Judaism, but who hasn't undergone all of the stuff that one actually has to do to convert. So her ears perk up, right? Like she's interested in what he has to say. Here's this new twist on things she's probably heard from other Jewish people at other places. And she wants in. So she and her household, it says, marches her servants, whatever kind of family she may have. It doesn't mention a husband, but it says she has a household, so either she was widowed or she was one of those very, very few women in Roman culture that had gained some kind of autonomy and wealth without being married. But whatever the case, she marches them down to the river, and they all get baptized. This is another very interesting thing. Like Paul's very loose here on what constitutes membership in this new community. Had Lydia wanted to convert to Judaism, like any other time besides this interaction with Paul, there would have been all kinds of things to do, a huge process. Stand before temple leadership, be deemed like clean, offer some sort of sacrifice, then be baptized, right? Among other steps. But Paul, in the way Jesus taught his followers to do, basically just like takes all this authority on himself, right? And he tells these women, yeah, you're in, right? It makes us think about the time when Jesus said, whoever you forgive is forgiven, and whoever you don't forgive is not forgiven. The power lies within you. You want in, Lydia? Sure, come on in. He does come under fire, as we know, for this attitude, for the leaders at Jerusalem, for this kind of like flippant way he invites people in. This easy, wide invite does come with its whole own host of problems and issues and interpersonal consequences, which is why Paul wrote time and time again to these congregations, to these groups of people. Suddenly, all kinds of people are meeting together in very intimate ways and under the same mission, who all think and do things very differently from each other. So we see all kinds of messes that Paul has to deal with and help clean up and all that, but we often forget these are great problems to have. In the creation of new humanity, of course there's growing pains. Of course there's misunderstanding. Without it, we probably are too sane, right? If we're not struggling a little bit with like how to actually meet with each other and how to listen to each other, we've probably just cloistered ourselves in the gates. So for me, when I look at this text, right, I see an example that should be followed. The movement that began with Jesus is always a go outside the gates movement. The freedom we have in the Spirit, the freedom alluded to by Rachel, is the freedom to be unauthorized, to include people that others won't, to listen to people that maybe others are afraid to listen to. It's also the freedom to go and share what you've found with other people. Right? Look, you've all found something meaningful to you. That's why you're here. And that's okay. It's needed, in fact, for you to share that with other people. You never know when you might run across a Lydia, right, who's kind of just looking for that thing that makes sense, who's overhearing you and finds something necessary for them from what you're sharing. It's good to do that here, right, among the people you trust and know. It's good to be vulnerable and share yourself and share your story so that people can hear it and we can all build each other up. But it's even more necessary to go outside the gates and do it. Or be like Paul and go wherever people are talking about ideas. Is it the Athenian temple? Go there. Is it the marketplace? Go there. Is it down by the river and there's a group of women doing laundry? Go there. I love when he says they assumed there'd be a place of prayer by the river. We've got to be like that. Well, there's probably people talking about God at the coffee shop, so I'm going to go there. There's probably people talking about politics at the coffee shop. There's probably people talking about religion down at the bar. Wherever it is that you think, that you assume people are talking about life's important matters, go there and share. Many of you have stories that you've shared with me, most of you, of being like confused about how to share your story. Many of you feel like you don't fit in a very particular box. And so it's difficult for you to know how to share what you've found, right? Like, I don't really think about God in the traditional way, but I love coming to church, and I like what Jesus said. But when I try to explain all of that to people, nobody gets it. They either want me to be in or they want me to be out, and I don't really know how to say anything meaningful in that context. That's fine. When you don't fit in a neat and tidy box, you're hanging out with the likes of Jesus and Paul. So I just want today to encourage you, right? Share what you have found with the people around you and do it in unlikely places. Let's pray. God, we come before you and we have gratitude. We're thankful for the often dizzying freedom that we see within ourselves. But we're thankful that that's a reflection of your image in us. It's not a reflection, it is your image in us. We're thankful for the blessings that you've given us, the people in our lives who love us, the ability to move through the world freely and take responsibility for our own actions. Spaces of safety and comfort where love can grow. We thank you for those blessings. And so we ask you to strengthen and embolden us and give us courage to go outside the gates, metaphorically, maybe physically. Maybe something of your image in us. Maybe someone in this room following what they've seen of you within themselves is going to go to a different country, to a different people group. Or maybe we just have the freedom to speak to a friend in a new way. Whatever it is, God, keep our eyes open, keep our hearts open so that we can run into what you would have for us. In Jesus' name, amen.